Hold your breath, because what you're about to hear was never meant to escape the shadows. This isn't a rumor. This isn't shade. This is the kind of story that makes phones vibrate in boardrooms and forces powerful people to whisper instead of speak. For years, the world was fed perfection, flawless photos, untouchable status, a carefully protected image that looked bulletproof. But tonight, that image is cracking. Just hours ago, a controversial media figure dropped a bomb so heavy it sent shockwaves through the entire entertainment industry. Insiders are calling it the most dangerous secret they've ever seen leak. Not because it's messy, but because it was allegedly buried for a reason. And now, the silence is breaking. Private messages are surfacing. Old interviews suddenly don't sound the same. Industry connections are quietly distancing themselves. And behind closed doors, panic is spreading faster than anyone can control. Sources claim lawyers were activated before the story even finished recording. That's how serious this is. Social media is already in chaos. Fans are dissecting timelines, freezing frames, reposting clips that suddenly feel like warnings. Careers that once looked untouchable are now standing on thin ice, and nobody knows who's going to speak next, or who's going to be exposed trying to stay quiet. Because according to what's being whispered, this wasn't just about fame or relationships. It was about trust. About secrets being protected at all costs. And about how far an industry will go to keep a story from becoming public. Nobody was prepared for the moment the recording went live. No warning. No countdown. Just a voice that sounded calm enough to be dangerous, dropping a statement so loaded it felt like the floor shifted beneath the entire industry. Within minutes, phones started lighting up. Not from fans, from executives. From lawyers. From people who never panic unless something real is about to spill. The media figure at the center of the storm didn't yell. She didn't tease. She spoke slowly, deliberately, like someone who already knew the damage was irreversible. She said the secret had been sitting in plain sight for years, hidden behind glamour, schedules packed too tight for questions, and a circle of protection, so thick it scared even insiders. Then she said one sentence that changed everything: this was never supposed to go public. Immediately, timelines started collapsing. Fans pulled old clips, pausing interviews where laughter suddenly felt forced. Screenshots began circulating, DMs with dates that didn't add up, messages that stopped mid-sentence, voice notes that sounded panicked instead of playful. None of it proved anything on its own, but together it painted something unsettling. A pattern. A silence that wasn't natural. Behind the scenes, the reaction was chaos masquerading as control. Emergency calls were placed under private numbers. Meetings happened in cars instead of offices. One publicist reportedly told a client to delete their entire phone history, just to be safe. Another insider claimed a scheduled announcement was pulled last minute, after a single name was mentioned in a group chat. No explanation given. Just gone. The story centered on a global superstar known for precision, every move calculated, every appearance immaculate. But according to the claims, that precision wasn't just branding. It was survival. Insiders whispered that years ago, something happened that forced a permanent shift in how this star moved through the world. Fewer close relationships. Faster exits. A carefully managed rotation of people who never stayed long enough to ask the wrong questions. And then came the alleged leak that made the room go cold. A former associate, someone who had signed more NDAs than they could count, allegedly broke down after a private dispute and shared fragments of conversations that were never meant to exist outside a vault. Not screenshots, summaries. Not documents, descriptions. Enough to suggest that multiple people inside the inner circle knew something was wrong, but no one wanted to be the one to say it out loud. The media figure claimed this associate wasn't motivated by money or fame. They were scared. Scared that the longer the silence lasted, the more people could get hurt in ways that couldn't be undone. And that fear, according to her, is what finally cracked the dam. As the story unfolded, another name entered the narrative, a rising star who had been romantically linked to the superstar during a very specific window. At the time, fans called it chemistry. In hindsight, insiders described it as rushed, intense, and strangely guarded. The rising star was seen pulling back suddenly, cancelling appearances, skipping events they had once begged to attend. No explanation. Just distance. Friends noticed the change first. The constant anxiety. The obsession with reassurance. The sudden need to talk privately with people they barely trusted before. One source claimed the rising star asked questions that were never answered directly, questions that turned affection into fear almost overnight. Then came the breakup. No drama. No statements. Just silence so loud it felt intentional. Online, fans turned on each other instantly. Some defended the superstar with ferocity, calling the claims jealous fiction. Others started connecting dots, resurfacing blind items that once seemed ridiculous, but now read like warnings. Hashtags trended and vanished within hours. Videos were flagged. Lives were cut midstream. It was as if an invisible hand kept pressing delete. The media figure didn't celebrate any of this. Her tone stayed measured, almost grim. She said the most disturbing part wasn't the secret itself. It was how many people worked together to pretend it didn't exist. Managers who redirected conversations. Friends who stopped asking questions. Partners who sensed danger but couldn't name it. She described a moment when the rising star allegedly confronted someone inside the circle and was met with legal language instead of honesty. Not denial. Not confirmation. Just warnings about consequences, careers, and misunderstandings. That was the moment, she said, when fear replaced confusion. As the recording neared its end, she revealed that this was only the surface. That what she shared had been vetted, watered down, and stripped of the most explosive details, not to protect reputations, but because releasing everything at once would cause irreversible harm. She said there were names she wasn't ready to say yet. Messages she hadn't played. Connections that would only make sense once the full picture was visible. Then she dropped the line that sent chills through everyone listening. She said the industry didn't stay silent because it didn't know. It stayed silent because it did. And just before the feed cut, she added one final warning: the next part isn't about rumors anymore. It's about who panicked when they realized this could never be buried again. And that's when the calls started coming in. The moment the feed went dark, the industry didn't breathe a sigh of relief, it held its breath. Because now the damage wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was active. According to insiders, within minutes of the recording ending, crisis lines lit up across 3 continents. Not fans calling radio stations. Not bloggers scrambling for clicks. This was higher. Quieter. More dangerous. Lawyers dialing lawyers. Executives demanding names. Assistants being told to stay off Slack and answer nothing in writing. And that's when the story took a turn no one expected. The media figure returned less than 24 hours later, not louder, not angrier, calmer. Which terrified people even more. She opened by saying she hadn't planned to continue so soon, but something had happened after the first drop. Someone panicked. And panic, she said, always leaves fingerprints. According to her, a cease and desist had been drafted before sunrise, but it never made it to her inbox. Instead, it was sent to the wrong person, a former fixer who no longer worked in silence. That mistake cracked open a door no one realized was still unlocked. Because attached to that legal threat were references, dates, internal language that confirmed what insiders had only whispered. This wasn't damage control for a rumor. It was containment of a known risk. She claimed the wording alone proved awareness. Not suspicion. Awareness. Behind the scenes, the superstar's inner circle allegedly fractured overnight. People who had protected the image for years began distancing themselves from each other. One manager stopped returning calls. A longtime stylist quietly removed their name from a bio. A publicist who once defended everything suddenly went silent on social media. To the public, it looked like coincidence. To insiders, it looked like people trying to exit before the fire spread. Then came the leaks. Not documents, voice notes. Fragmented. Emotional. Recorded late at night, with shaky breathing and unfinished sentences. In one, a voice allegedly said, "If this gets out, it won't just ruin one person. It'll take down everyone who knew." In another, someone begged to handle it privately like before, a phrase that raised alarms across the industry. Before what? And how many times? The media figure claimed these recordings weren't handed to her by enemies. They came from people who had once sworn loyalty. People who now felt trapped between silence and guilt. She said one source described living for years with the fear that a single conversation could destroy multiple lives, not reputations, lives. As social media caught the scent of blood, the chaos exploded. A cryptic tweet from a former collaborator went viral before being deleted. Fans screen recorded it anyway. A reaction video hit 1 million views in hours before disappearing. Comment sections turned into war zones. One side screaming defamation. The other demands accountability. Everyone is asking the same question. Why does this feel bigger than gossip? And then the rising star resurfaced. Not in an interview. Not in a statement. In absence. A scheduled appearance was cancelled last minute. A project announcement was quietly postponed. Friends stopped tagging them. One insider claimed the rising star had been advised to stay invisible until further notice. Not for PR, for safety. Emotional safety. Legal safety. Something about that phrasing unsettled everyone paying attention. The media figure addressed this directly. She said the rising star was never supposed to be part of the fallout. That they were collateral, someone who walked into a situation without the information needed to protect themselves. According to her sources, this was the first person who pushed back, who asked for clarity instead of accepting reassurance. And once they did, the tone shifted. Suddenly, everything became contractual. Conversations were redirected through intermediaries. Questions were met with silence or threats of breach. The relationship ended not with a fight, but with a war. Then she dropped another revelation. She claimed this wasn't the first time the industry had closed ranks like this. That there were earlier incidents, earlier partners, earlier near-misses that had been quietly erased. Careers that stalled for no clear reason. Collaborations that vanished without explanation. People who left the spotlight and never said why. Patterns only become obvious once you know what to look for. At this point, even supporters of the superstar began to waver. Not because they believed every claim, but because the reactions didn't match innocence. Silence became strategic. Statements were vague. Language was carefully sanitized. No one denied knowledge, they denied responsibility. And that distinction mattered. According to the media figure, the most damning moment came when a high-level executive allegedly asked a single question in a private meeting. Who else could this touch? Not, is it true? Not, how do we clear it up? Who else? That question, she said, revealed everything. The industry wasn't trying to protect the public. It was trying to map exposure. She claimed emergency reviews were ordered, not public audits, private ones. Calendars examined. Guest lists cross-referenced. Tours, after-parties, private flights, locked rooms where NDAs were treated like permission slips. Suddenly, past intimacy wasn't romantic, it was liability. The emotional toll escalated fast. One source allegedly broke down during a call, repeating the phrase, "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." Another demanded written proof of conversations that no longer existed. Trust disintegrated in real time. As the pressure mounted, something unexpected happened. A second voice reached out. Not to the media figure directly, to a rival platform. Someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose. They claimed they had been warned years ago to back off, without being told why. They listened. They stayed quiet. And now they regretted it. Because they believed what was happening now could have been stopped earlier. That message leaked within hours. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't just about one star. It was about a system that normalized silence. Fans began asking harder questions. Why were certain stories never covered? Why did some outlets always look the other way? Why did accountability only surface when someone outside the machine spoke up? The media figure ended this segment with a warning sharper than the first. She said what she revealed so far was only the emotional fallout. The panic. The betrayals. The cracks in the facade. The next phase, she warned, would involve proof, not just of what was hidden, but of how far people went to keep it that way. She said there were timelines that contradicted public narratives. Agreements that explained sudden exits. Messages that showed coordination, not coincidence. Then she paused and delivered the line that shifted everything again. This wasn't just about protecting a star. It was about protecting an entire playbook. And just before signing off, she added one last sentence that sent a chill through everyone watching. The next drop explains why this story was never meant to survive the light, and why someone inside finally decided they didn't care anymore. The screen went black. And somewhere, someone started deleting files far too late. By the time the third drop was imminent, the industry had already accepted one truth it could no longer outrun: this story was alive now. And once a story reaches that stage, it doesn't need permission to keep spreading. According to insiders, the night before the final reveal felt like a countdown no one could stop. Offices stayed lit past midnight. Secure servers were accessed from unfamiliar locations. One assistant allegedly quit on the spot, after being asked to sanitize the timeline they didn't create. The media figure opened the final recording without theatrics. No build-up. No warning. She said the most dangerous phase of any scandal isn't the exposure, it's the realization that silence didn't fail. Silence worked exactly as designed. Until someone decided they were done protecting people who never protected them. She claimed what she was about to explain wasn't a theory. It was a system. According to her sources, the entertainment machine had long relied on a quiet protocol for sensitive risks. Not scandals that could be spun, but situations that required containment. The playbook was simple: isolate the issue, rotate the people involved, distract the audience, and if necessary, discredit anyone who got too close to the truth. Not with attacks. With doubt. With exhaustion. With legal fear. She alleged that once the rising star asked the wrong questions, the protocol activated. Meetings that excluded them. Conversations that stopped mid-sentence when they entered rooms. A sudden shift from warmth to distance that felt surgical. And when the relationship ended, the narrative was already written, not for the public, but for the industry. What shocked listeners most was what came next. She revealed that the final push to speak out didn't come from revenge or money. It came from documentation. Someone inside the system had kept records. Not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. Emails that showed coordination. Calendar changes that aligned too perfectly. Messages that referenced containment windows and rotation strategies. Language that sounded less like PR and more like crisis logistics. The media figure said, when she saw those materials, the story stopped being dramatic and started being structural. This wasn't about one person's secret. It was about how many people were trained to protect an image at any cost, and how many others paid the price for that protection without ever knowing why. Social media erupted again, but this time the tone had shifted. Less screaming. More unease. Fans weren't just arguing anymore, they were questioning the entire illusion. Clips resurfaced of old interviews where answers felt rehearsed. Breakups that once seemed random now looked choreographed. Hiatuses suddenly felt intentional. And then came the emotional collapse no one expected. A source close to the rising star allegedly confirmed they had stepped away not for career reasons, but because they no longer trusted the environment. The constant gaslighting. The sense that reality kept shifting depending on who held power. According to the source, the rising star wasn't afraid of the truth, they were afraid of how many people had agreed to pretend it didn't exist. The media figure addressed the superstar directly for the first time, not by name, but by position. She said living inside a protected bubble doesn't mean you're free. It means everyone around you is paid to keep you functional, not honest. She described it as a gilded isolation, where fear masquerades as control and movement becomes a coping mechanism. Then she said something that reframed the entire story. She said the real scandal wasn't the secret. It was the aftermath. The way the system ensured that if harm occurred, it would be absorbed quietly by people without leverage. That the machine didn't ask whether something was right, only whether it could be managed. According to her, this was why so many people felt complicit but powerless. Why guilt spread faster than accountability. Why the first instinct wasn't truth, but containment. As the recording reached its final minutes, she revealed that she had chosen not to release everything. Not because of fear, but because the point had already landed. The public didn't need every detail. They needed to see the pattern. To understand how easily narratives are manufactured, and how quickly reality bends when money and influence apply pressure. She said more voices were coming. Some anonymously. Some not. Because once one person breaks silence, others realize they're not alone anymore. And that's when systems start to crack. The final moments were quiet. She reminded listeners that this story wasn't about canceling anyone. It was about recognizing how many truths never make it to daylight, because the cost of speaking is too high. And how dangerous it becomes when silence is normalized as professionalism. Then she ended with a sentence that felt less like a warning and more like a verdict. Pay attention to who rushes to control the narrative instead of answering the question. The feed cut. No outro music. No sign-off. And in that silence, something irreversible settled in. Because even without names, even without documents on screen, the illusion had been punctured. The audience had seen behind the curtain. They understood now that some stories don't explode, they unravel. Slowly. Quietly. Until the system that held them together can no longer pretend it was never involved. And from that moment forward, every perfectly polished image would carry a new shadow. Not because of what was said, but because of what everyone suddenly realized might still be hidden. If you've made it this far, do not click away, because this is the exact moment stories like this either disappear forever, or force real conversations to start. What you just heard wasn't designed to make you comfortable. It was designed to wake you up. And the only reason narratives like this ever survive is because people refuse to let them be buried again. Right now, algorithms decide what lives and what dies. Silence is rewarded. Discomfort gets suppressed. And the fastest way for powerful stories to vanish is for viewers to stay quiet. That's why engagement isn't optional. It's the difference between this becoming another erased moment, or a turning point. If you felt uneasy, confused, or even angry while listening, that reaction matters. Drop it in the comments. Ask the questions you're not supposed to ask. Say what stood out to you. Because once people start comparing notes, patterns become impossible to ignore. Hit like, not because you agree, but because you understand the importance of keeping conversations alive when they're inconvenient. Subscribe, because stories like this don't come with warnings, they come when silence finally cracks. And when the next piece drops, you don't want to be catching up after it's already been reshaped or watered down. Turn notifications on. Screenshots disappear. Videos get flagged. Narratives get rewritten. But the people who were here early, they remember what was said before the edits. This isn't about drama. It's about awareness. About how easily truth gets redirected. And about how quickly attention moves on if you let it. So don't let it move on. Engage. Speak. Stay watching. Because the stories that matter most are the ones someone desperately wants you to forget.